and welcome to Macros with Mythili, the ET Now show that takes a hard look at all the major macroeconomic issues and developments in India and overseas. This week, we're going to take a look at an issue in the banking sector that the government is seized with. Well, no, not NPAs, but mergers in the public sector bank space. Speaking for myself, I'm a bit foxed, frankly, at the government expending scarce bandwidth on an exercise whose merits are debatable, particularly at this juncture when you have so many other more pressing issues, which is why I have with me two experts, Mr. A.K. Purwar, the former chairman of the largest bank in India, State Bank of India, and T.T. Ram Mohan, Professor of Economics, IIM Ahmedabad, both of whom will doubtless throw more light on this issue. Welcome to the show, Mr. Purwar, TTR. Mr. Purwar, theory and practice are invariably far apart. And nowhere is that more true than in the matter of bank mergers. So before we debate the theoretical merits of bank merger, let me ask you for a practitioner's perspective. The first merger of SBI with State Bank of Saurashtra was in 2008, during the time of our successor O.P. Bhatt, who oversaw another merger a year later with State Bank of Indore, after which there was a long lull, until we had the more recent merger of the remaining associate banks and Bharatiya Mahila Bank. So my question to you is, did you at any time during your chairmanship consider a merger with the associate banks? Was there any push from the government to do so? Now you can now speak quite freely and frankly, since you're a former chairman.
Well, let me be very candid that in my time there was just no pressure from
Absolutely.
My regulators, nor from the government, for merger of associate banks. And if you and let me put it this way, that we in the bank independently also examined this issue. And we found that the merger was rather very expensive for the bank, in the sense that a state bank had all the three benefits for the employees, and associate banks only had two benefits, and therefore merger at that time was costing a couple of thousands of crores. So we didn't do that merger. We attempted a different kind of merger, a technology merger, treasury very closely coordinated, high value credit very closely coordinated, and it worked very well because in the process we captured the strength of associate banks, which had very strong presence in their respective areas, and also the economies of size in terms of same technology, same business processes, highly coordinated treasury, highly coordinated credit function. So the advantages of consolidation or merger were accruing to the system without actual merger taking place. There was a virtual merger, no physical merger in my time.
Oh, absolutely. I think there are many people who would argue that a merger of businesses is far better than the merger of the banks per se. But TTR, way back in 1992, the Narasimham Committee had recommended some kind of rationalization of banks. It had wanted 4 or 5 large banks with an international presence and then some banks with a regional presence and so on. But no government really acted on this recommendation. So what is the advantage of a large bank that this government is suddenly seeing? Of course, previous governments too have spoken of consolidation, but this government seems more serious. And as we've seen, this is a government that does not hesitate to act. Also, is it a bit ironic that today when large banks are seen as a disadvantage, both from the regulatory perspective because of the too large to fail logic, and also because it imposes costs on the banks themselves by way of additional capital requirements for being systemically important, why is the government so determined to merge banks, TTR?
Well, I think the stated rationale is to have fewer and stronger banks from whatever I've been able to make out so far. And here the presumption seems to be that fewer means stronger. So if you merge some of the nationalized banks, you will end up getting stronger banks. And I think that's a presumption that needs to be seriously questioned, because it's certainly not supported by a wide body of academic literature on the benefits of bank mergers. The academic literature is entirely unambiguous on whether mergers enhance shareholder value. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't work. In the majority of cases, they don't seem to work. And therefore, if you say that mergers of nationalized banks are going to make the banks stronger, one has to be extremely skeptical. Now, this is even in contexts where there's a lot of flexibility of labor, and you have enough scope to rationalize branches. So you have those kinds of impediments are missing. So even in those kinds of economies, it's very hard to make mergers work. Today we are talking of a situation where the vast majority of our banks are seriously stressed, and the entire managerial energy is focused on getting out of a very difficult situation in terms of non-performing assets, in terms of weak credit growth and so on. So I don't think, leaving aside the SBI group, there is any bank which is strong enough to absorb a relatively weaker bank. And therefore, it's not clear to me how merger of banks is going to make the two banks stronger. Now, you have to understand that bank mergers pose very formidable managerial
Absolutely.
challenges, and the HR challenges are especially very
Absolutely.
strong,
Yes.
very
Yes.
formidable.
So we'll come to the challenges a little later, TTR, but
and-
right now let me just
Sure.
ask Mr. Purwar. TTR said that even on academic literature, research doesn't really establish a very strong case for the mergers, and in practice we had only one merger between public sector banks when the new Bank of India was merged with PNB, and there was virtually nothing about that merger that was particularly happy. It was not driven by commercial considerations but by the desire to bail out new bank. We also saw Global Trust Bank, a private bank, being merged with Oriental Bank of Commerce for the same reason, and in both cases the bank that took over the troubled bank struggled for a long time to get back to where it was pre-merger. Given that this is what we have on the ground, what could be the rationale for forcing mergers now? TTR said there's no logic academically, theoretically. Practically also we saw that the experience has not been happy. So what is the argument now, Mr. Purwar?
Yeah, can I let me look to this question from a different perspective. But before I say anything, I would like to support what Professor Mohan has said, that if you merge banks and banks with serious problems, then instead of merger giving any advantage to the merged entity in terms of size, economies of scale and all, it can create a big bad bang. So there is a lot of logic in what's being said, but then let us look at what are the requirements of the economy, what are the requirements of the Indian society. Indian society has started growing very well for the last couple of years. Kind of sophistication which has acquired, kind of size which it has got, kind of issues which it has, kind of sophistication which is there in the system in terms of lot of digitization, lot of up-to-date technology being required, technology in the banking system being constantly upgraded, and so on and so forth. So these are the issues which the system is today addressing. Now, in addressing these issues and the requirements of the economy, I personally, and this is my consistent opinion for last maybe 15 years or so, and more so after working in State Bank of India for almost 40 years, seeing the advantage of working in a big bank, that you have to have banks which can compete with SBI on the ground in a very effective manner. State Bank is too big, and you require such a few powerful gorillas like SBI to fight with each other in the market, and have the technology levels, have the treasury management levels, have the forex management or credit management of that order, which is perhaps not there in the kind of size of the public sector banks which we are having.
TTR, I'm not sure I agree with Mr. Purwar, because size can be a huge disadvantage, as I spoke earlier, both in terms of the too big to fail as also in terms of the additional capital requirements. Moreover, is the SBI merger with associate banks a wrong template for the government to base its arguments on? True, Bharatiya Mahila Bank was a bit of a foundling really, but SBI and its associates, as Mr. Purwar said, already had a great deal in common, including till fairly recently a common treasury. The associate bank's MD was almost invariably from State Bank of India, and if despite this the merger was not without hiccups, are we being a little unrealistic in expecting, say, an Indian overseas bank, Tamil Nadu based, to be happy in a marriage with, say, Punjab National Bank, or say Punjab Sindh Bank in a marriage with Indian Bank or Canara Bank? What are we talking about, TTR?
Yes, I think I entirely agree with you. I don't think the SBI merger can be used as a template at all, because as you correctly mentioned, there are enormous commonalities between SBI and associate banks which are not to be found when you're looking at any two nationalized banks. I mean, SBI and its associate banks have a common culture, they have a common IT architecture. The SBI chairman closely monitors the associate banks. The parent has operational control over many aspects of the subsidiary of the associate banks and so on. That is not the case when you're considering two nationalized banks. And the point is, as I said, the main reason that bank mergers don't work out, or mergers in general don't work out, is because the managerial challenges they pose are very formidable. So first of all, there are the very significant HR issues, which are a huge drain on managerial energies. In the public sector context, the immediate issue will be which general manager is to report to which general manager, which deputy general manager is to be fitted into which grade, and so on. And our experience has been that this kind of HR integration drags on for years, 3, 4, 5 years at the very least, and it can completely sap the energies of top management. Now, on top of that, the IT architecture is very different among the nationalized banks. The documentation and processes are very different. So, while theoretically speaking, you could argue that you need a very large bank to compete with State Bank of India, I think the practical aspects are too daunting for us to contemplate. But apart from that, let me say that I'm not entirely persuaded that you need to be a very large bank in order to be efficient or competitive in the Indian context. In fact, the entire experience with many of the private sector banks is that size is really no obstacle to superior performance. If you look at a wide range of some of the newer private sector banks, they are only a fraction of the size of State Bank of India. Many of them are not even of the size of some of the nationalized banks, and yet their financial performance is vastly superior, which shows that a smaller and nimbler player has plenty of opportunities for growth in the Indian situation. And I don't think you need to look at merger as a means for improving your performance at all.
Okay, so we have two very different opinions, but I know Mr. Purwar, you wanted to come in on something, but it's time for us to slip into a very short break. So please stay with us. We'll be back very soon, and then you can hear Mr. Purwar on what he agrees and does not agree with TTR on. Welcome back. You're watching Macros with Mythili, and I'm in discussion with Mr. Purwar and TTR on the merits or demerits of bank merger. Mr. Purwar, you wanted to say something, and now let me just add one question to what you wanted to say, that many of the banks that are on the sick bay today could in fact turn around tomorrow. In fact, you had the outstanding example of Indian Bank, whose net worth had turned negative and it was nursed back to health under Ranjana Kumar. So there could be better ways of handling a troubled bank than by merger with a better bank. Surely you would agree on that, Mr. Purwar?
The time when Mrs. Kumar, I know personally, I have a great amount of respect for her. She did an outstanding job in Indian Bank. But, there is a 10 years difference. I fully agree with Mr. Rammohan that the size is not important. What is important is the quality of books of a bank, the quality of processes of the bank, quality of the people of the bank. And some of the small banks have proved that. I fully agree with that observation. But having said that, look at the 20 and odd, almost 30 public sector banks which are existing in the system today, and what kind of role they are playing today, what kind of position they are in. Look at the credit quality. It is in a terrible shape. Worst possible shape than what we could have presumed. Look at the treasury management side. Having set up and modernized SBI treasury, the treasury management also needs huge amount of upgradation, HR practices, yes, in any merger, there are very significant HR issues which have to be addressed. Yes, those are challenges will be there. But look at the positioning today in the market. The public sector banks are excepting SBI, maybe 2, 3 other banks. The rest of the banking system, rest of the public sector banking system is in a very, very bad shape. Now, we can nurse them, we can bring them back, we can recruit 29, 30 outstanding banking executives and ask them to turn it around. That's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it, that this is an opportunity to see to it that the ills of the system get addressed. That either we consolidate them, capitalize them properly, create a good size, and ask them to compete in the market. The other way is nurse them. Nursing will take 5, 10 years. The kind of capital requirements which are going to be there are going to be huge. And thirdly, with the kind of salary scales which we have in public sector, which is another issue which is required to be addressed, will you be able to attract top quality talent to nurse these banks and turn them around? And then have 30 banks out of 30, how many will get turned around? It will be an issue. So consolidation is a must, and consolidation with the public sector banks, I am very open there. It could be public sector or it could be private sector.
Okay. Okay, TTR, it is true, public sector banks, many of them are not in good health. But my question really is that can merger possibly solve an issue? Because instead of two small banks with problems, you will get saddled with one bank with much larger problem unless, and I repeat, unless the merger is followed up with changing the way the banks function. And if that is not going to happen, what use is the merger? In fact, normally mergers help when the different banks have very different strengths so that they complement each other once they merge. But that's not true in the case of public sector banks because they are virtually very similar profiles. Earlier there was some difference in their geographical coverage and even that is not there. And it is also true what Mr. Purwar said about salary structures in the public sector. But you yourself work in the public sector, TTR. You've never been kind of tempted to go to say an ISB. So surely there is something to be said for the public sector as well, TTR?
Yes, and well, you could also argue that the same public sector scale pay scale has not prevented State Bank of India from being a very formidable competitor in the market. So I think we should not overdo this salary part, which is not to say that issues of compensation in public sector don't have to be addressed. But let's pose the question fairly. I think what the question that we are asking is how do we strengthen banks, public sector banks, which are not in good shape today? I think the straightforward course, which I think Mr. Purwar mentioned, is to simply infuse adequate capital in them and provide the right leadership. And of course, it's going to take a while, as he says, it may take 3 to 4-5 years to strengthen these banks. So that is one option. The other option, if you think that some of the banks at the bottom of the ladder, say the last 3 or 4 or 5 banks are in very bad shape, and you're desperate to strengthen them, then the correct option is not merger, but to simply lower the government stake to something like 33% and bring in a strategic partner. So that will help the government conserve scarce capital and to use that capital for infusion into the stronger banks, and it will also reduce the management bandwidth in government, so to speak. So they don't have to monitor something like 21 public sector banks, they have to monitor fewer banks. So you can focus your energies better on a few strong banks. So I think that would be a better route to take. And even the unions may be in agreement with that. If we tell them that, look, 3 or 4 banks which are really laggards here, there isn't much we can do to help them, but we can bring in strategic partners in these banks, on the understanding that the capital which is conserved by government will go towards strengthening the relatively stronger banks. That is probably a better route to take than trying to add 2 and 2 and end up getting 3.5.
That's true, Mr. Purwar. I would like you to react to TTR's suggestion, apart from which isn't the health of banks closely related in fact to the health of the economy, which is why even if you look at it on a more granular basis, you will find that the banks that are headquartered in the east, that is Allahabad Bank, United and UCO Bank, are typically in a much worse position compared to their counterparts elsewhere. So should we not accept that it's a bit of a chicken or egg situation? Banks will not improve until the economy improves and vice versa, and merger in itself will not do anything. So two questions to you. One on how the banks will improve if the economy improves, and on TTR's pointer that maybe if the government were to distance itself and bring its stake down, that itself might be an answer to changing the culture in public sector banks. Mr. Purwar?
Yeah, I think let me address it a little differently. If a strong bank is there, even if the economy goes down, the bank doesn't go down with that. The bank continues to, maybe its growth rate may come down. Its profitability might be somewhat impacted. But as such, bank will not go back. Say, for example, State Bank of India working for now almost 210 years, 213, 14 years. Well, it has seen lots of ups and downs. And every adversity has made it a stronger bank to come. Even today, if you look at State Bank working or State Bank balance sheet or State Bank, it continues to be very formidable. So, economy is always, 8%, 7%, 5%, 4%. But yes, economy, the growth rate may undergo a change. There could be issues. But banks should be very soundly managed. And I think that is where the present public sector banking system has not acquitted itself well. Having said that, I might sound a little radical, but the point is that if a public sector banking system was created where we have 13 odd banks, they were supposed to be very properly managed. How come that they have been saddled, or they are saddled today with such an amount of large NPAs? So much so that now capital, there is hardly any capital with some of the banks, and I'm afraid that some of the banks might be utilizing the deposits for paying salary to the staff. I do not know. I mean, I'm not a part of the system, but I can guess that the sickness could be that serious. I look at it this way, that for any bank, protecting depositors' money should be the primary consideration. Looking after customers and giving them proper service should be the primary consideration. And if those tests are, and there has to be adequate capital to service all this. If any bank is not meeting these criteria, I'm afraid that a lot of surgical operation is warranted. And I think time has come that the present state in which the public sector banking system is, we have to, despite being a public sector man, I personally feel that a lot more stricter, tougher measures are required.
But Mr. Burari, all know why is it that public sector banks a major part of the reason is that they are basically handmaidens of the government. Under the previous government, public sector banks lent hugely to infrastructure at a time when they should not have lent on commercial considerations. So let us accept that the fact that the Indian economy did not sink immediately after the global financial crisis was precisely because these public sector banks lent at a time when many of the private sector banks in fact stopped lending. So I don't think it is very fair to say that public sector banks are incapable in any way. They were basically acting as per the behest of their owner, the government. So I'm not sure I entirely agree with you, and I'm not sure whether TTR also will agree with you. But TTR, I wanted to ask you one more question apart from your response to that. What is this fixation with size? That's something that really defeats me. What is so great, frankly, about having an Indian bank amongst the top 50 global banks and so on? After the latest merger, SBI, I believe, has managed to get into the top 50. But does that really change anything? SBI will remain a bank from a developing lower middle income country, period. So what are we trying to do?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, this mania for getting into the, the top 50 or the top 100 in the world is something I've not been able to comprehend at all. Because you can be very large in terms of balance sheet size, but that's not what matters. What matters is market capitalization. And I remember seeing a report only a few days ago which said that the market cap of HDFC Bank is going to be $100 billion by 2020, even though their balance sheet will still be a fraction of some of the biggest banks in the country. So that's what you need to focus on. The market cap and the profit growth rather than the absolute balance sheet size. So I won't attach much importance to balance sheet size at all. But let me mention one or two other aspects of merger or bank consolidation which I think are relevant. I think it's very important to look at the implications for market structure of any bank consolidation that we undertake. You can have a banking sector which is extremely concentrated, which is not good because it exposes the system to greater systemic risk. It's also bad from the point of view of consumers. Or you can have a system which is extremely fragmented, which is not good for the banks because it means weak financials, and again it raises serious issues of systemic stability. So you need to be somewhere in between. You should not be too concentrated, you should not be too fragmented. And the way of judging this is to look at the share of the top 5 banks, the market share of assets or deposits of the top 5 banks. And here, before the SBI merger happened, we were very nicely placed in between the highly concentrated markets of the world and some of the most fragmented markets in the world like US and UK. So that the share of the top 5 banks in assets was something like 40%. I guess after the SBI merger it has become more concentrated, 50%. So we have to be extremely wary of the implications of greater consolidation for the market structure. You don't want a market structure which results in excessive concentration, because it works to the detriment of customers and it works to the detriment of systemic stability. That is something we have to be extremely mindful for.
But I'm afraid we've run out of time completely, so I'll have to end this discussion here. But before I close, I just want to quote from a speech given by Mr. R. Gandhi, former DG RBI in April 2016. And this is what he had to say. He says a merger will be useful only if it has strategic vision driven by synergy and creates value for both banks. Merger of a weak bank with a strong bank may make the combined entity weak if the merger process is not handled properly. The problems of capital shortage and higher NPAs may get transmitted to the stronger bank due to undue haste or a mechanical merger process. Consolidation should not be seen from the sole perspective of creating larger size banks. Ideally, the process has to be initiated by the boards of individual banks. Hopefully, the government will rethink its position. They only have to look to see what happened to Indian Airlines, which was merged with Air India, to have a foretaste of what they could be in for. Thank you so much, Mr. Purwar and TTR. Thank you also for watching. Remember, we'll be back next week with yet another edition of Macros with Mythili. Till then, it's thank you and goodbye from all of us at ET Now. In the meantime, if there's any issue you would like to hear discussed in this program, please do write into us at the email ID you see at the bottom of your screen.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/etnow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at etnowlive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/etnow.